Have you ever been treated like you didn't matter? Like no matter how hard you worked, how early you showed up, or how much you gave, people just laughed in your face? That was me, 15 years old, full of energy, hope, and a sense of fairness, and I was working in a pizza place where the people in charge thought I was nothing more than a joke. By the end of 2 weekends, though, I did something that made them regret underestimating me, and it was glorious. If you love stories where the underdog fights back, hit that like button. Subscribe and stay tuned, because today I'm going to take you through a tale of betrayal, teenage frustration, and one of the sweetest paybacks I've ever experienced. When I was 15, I wasn't supposed to be working in a pizza place. My first choice had been the local arena, an exciting, different kind of job that felt like it could actually teach me skills I could use later in life. I imagined myself walking into that arena, learning the ropes, handling equipment, maybe even being part of something bigger. But there was a catch. I wasn't old enough. The chemicals in the pool area required a minimum age of 16, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. I remember the frustration bubbling up in my chest that day. My parents tried to console me, but their words were hollow. I wasn't disappointed just in the job. I was disappointed in the system, disappointed in the arbitrary rules that blocked my chance, and yes, a little disappointed in myself. So, like many kids who want to make some money and have some independence, I applied for the pizza place. And not just any pizza place. It was the kind of restaurant that dominated the small town. People would line up sometimes for 30 minutes just to grab a table or a slice. It had an almost cult-like following for something as simple as pepperoni and cheese. And the management? A couple of college kids who had convinced themselves they were some kind of culinary geniuses. They strutted around the restaurant like they owned the universe, wearing their arrogance like a badge of honor. In reality, they were just slightly older than me, full of ego, and blissfully unaware that life outside the pizza place existed. I got the job in the kitchen, and at first I thought, okay, this isn't so bad. I chopped vegetables, loaded ovens, cleaned counters, and organized ingredients. There was a rhythm to the work, a repetitive simplicity that made it bearable. But I quickly realized that bearable and fun were two entirely different things. Within a month, they decided it would be a brilliant idea to teach me how to make dough. On paper, this sounded like a skill, something to be proud of. In reality, it was the beginning of my torment. Making dough meant arriving every weekend at 6 in the morning, hours before the restaurant opened, just to have enough ready for the noon rush. And for a 15-year-old kid, weekends weren't just time off, they were freedom. The only time I could breathe without someone looking over my shoulder. I remember standing there, hands on the counter, stomach sinking, thinking, "You've got to be kidding me. This isn't what I signed up for." I told them I'd learn it, but I drew a line. I refused to make it a weekly obligation. My parents had taught me to stand my ground, to fight for my personal boundaries, even if I was young. They promised it would only be one weekend shift a month, and I agreed. That's when Scott came into the picture. Scott was my friend, my ally, and eventually my partner in crime. He was the kind of guy who had my back without question, someone who shared my frustration and my sense of justice. We both learned the dough-making process quickly, mastering the techniques, memorizing the ratios, and getting our hands covered in flour so much it felt like part of us. For a brief moment, I thought it would be okay. The plan was simple. One weekend a month, share the load, and keep our freedom intact. But that fantasy didn't last long. Within just 2 weeks, the management changed the rules. No explanations, no apologies. Suddenly, I was on every Saturday, Scott was on every Sunday. And when I tried to speak up, laughter. Not a friendly chuckle, not an empathetic smile, just pure mockery. My boss leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and smirked at me, saying, "Why do bad?" The servers, all in their 20s, joined in. They made jokes at our expense, treating me and Scott like children to be laughed at. The feeling of powerlessness was suffocating. Every Saturday, my alarm clock would jolt me awake before dawn. The walk to the restaurant felt longer than it should. The streets quieter, the air heavier. By the time I got there, my hands were already sore from prepping for 6 hours of nonstop dough making. The mixers roared, the racks clanged. The smell of flour and yeast filled the room, almost overwhelming me. And through it all, the college kids watched us like we were circus performers, laughing when we struggled to keep up, delighting in our fatigue. I'll be honest, the anger was simmering inside me, a low, steady burn that made every Saturday shift feel like a personal injustice. I wanted to explode, to shout, to throw the dough across the room. But I didn't. Instead, I took notes. I watched. I observed every weakness in their system, every hole in their planning, every lazy assumption they made that I could exploit later. It was during one of these miserable Saturdays that life handed me an opportunity. My parents called me during my shift with news that the arena wanted me back for another interview. My heart leapt. This was it, the job I had dreamed about. The escape from the endless cycle of dough and humiliation. And I didn't stop there. I thought of Scott, my loyal friend who had endured the same abuse. I told the arena staff about him and made sure they had his resume. It was a seed planted for later, one that would grow into the perfect revenge. Little did my bosses know. Their arrogance, their laughter, and their underestimation of a 15-year-old were about to cost them dearly. After that first Saturday shift of pure exhaustion, I started noticing patterns in how the management ran the place. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was deliberate. They weren't sloppy because they were careless. They were arrogant. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they thought we were powerless. Every time I tried to speak up, my complaints bounced off walls of sarcasm and laughter. I remember one moment in particular. I had just finished mixing and portioning the last batch of dough for the day. My hands were coated in flour and sticky yeast, muscles trembling from the constant kneading. I wiped my hands on my apron, hoping for a word of acknowledgement. Instead, my boss, leaning casually against the counter, looked at me and said, "You know, if you really wanted to help, you'd come in every weekend. Just like Scott." Then she laughed, not politely, mockingly, like I had just told the dumbest joke imaginable. Inside, something snapped. The combination of physical exhaustion and emotional frustration made my chest tighten. My jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. Every sarcastic word, every condescending smirk fueled this growing fire. I felt small, powerless, trapped, but also incredibly aware of every single flaw in their system. Every weekend, I'd watch the chaos in the kitchen unfold while the big bosses strutted around the restaurant as if they were running a 5-star establishment. Yet the truth was painfully obvious. They were incompetent, lazy, and dependent on people like me and Scott to keep the place functioning. And then there was Scott, my partner in survival and eventual co-conspirator. Scott was the only person who understood my frustration, who laughed with me at the absurdity of our situation rather than at us. Every Sunday, when he endured the same relentless abuse I suffered on Saturdays, we would share knowing glances, small smiles, little gestures that said, "We see through their act." Our shared experiences bonded us in a way that made our eventual plan not only possible but inevitable. One particularly brutal Saturday, I had finished my shift, and my hands and arms ached so badly that I could barely carry the pizza trays out to the cooler. I trudged home covered in flour, yeast dust clinging to my hair, and my uniform smelling like a mixture of sweat and oven grease. My parents asked how my day went, and I just shook my head. I was too frustrated to speak. But inside, a thought had begun to crystallize. There was a way out. Not just quitting, but showing them, in the most perfect way possible, that they couldn't control us, couldn't humiliate us, and couldn't keep laughing at teenagers who knew exactly what they were doing. That week, my opportunity grew more concrete. The arena called back to schedule my next interview. This time, they were serious. They had positions available, and I was finally eligible to work there. The idea of stepping into a place where my skills and potential would actually matter made my heart pound. And the best part? I realized that Scott could come with me. I could help him get a foot in the door, giving us both an escape from the endless grind. But the thought of just quietly leaving and moving on didn't feel satisfying. No, this wasn't about simply quitting. This was about revenge. The bosses had underestimated us. They had laughed at us, treated us like children, and thought their power over a couple of teenagers was absolute. And that arrogance, that would be their undoing. I started thinking about the weaknesses in their system, like a chess player mapping out the board. The dough, the heart, of the operation was something they couldn't make without us. They always kept staffing minimal, which meant there wasn't anyone else capable of keeping up with the Saturday morning rush. The entire place depended on people like me and Scott, and they didn't even realize it. Every mocking laugh, every condescending remark, every moment of dismissal had just fueled the strategy forming in my mind. I began rehearsing it mentally over and over again. What if I showed up as usual, did everything in my power to seem compliant, and then at the exact right moment I walked away? Not silently, not cowardly, but fully in control, knowing that the chaos that followed would be their fault entirely. I could almost see it, the look on my boss's face, the panic as they realized there was no dough, the frantic scrambling to salvage the day. The thought made my pulse race and my stomach twist with anticipation. And then came the internal debate, the moral tug-of-war. I wasn't a malicious person. I didn't want to hurt anyone unnecessarily. But I did want justice. I wanted to balance the scales. I wanted them to feel, just for a moment, what it was like to be powerless, dismissed, and dependent on someone they had treated like a joke. In my mind, this wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was teaching a lesson, showing the consequences of arrogance and disrespect. And the more I imagined the scenario, the clearer it became that this wasn't only justified, it was necessary. By the end of that week, my decision was made. The plan was simple but precise. Show up, act like nothing had changed. Play the role of the obedient worker until the very last second, and then pull the rug out from under them completely. And of course, Scott would repeat it the following day, doubling the impact. 2 weekends, 2 strikes, in one powerful lesson delivered in the most satisfying way imaginable. Every night before the big Saturday, I went over the plan in my mind. I could feel the adrenaline building, the anticipation making my chest tight and my palms clammy. I kept imagining the sounds. The mixers whirring, the oven doors slamming, my boss's voice rising in panic as reality hit. I felt a strange combination of nervousness and exhilaration, sensed that something big was about to happen, and that I was finally taking control. And when the morning finally came, I knew it was going to be perfect. That Saturday morning, I woke up before my alarm. The room was dark, the house quiet, but in my head everything was crystal clear. That moment of clarity, the one that comes when you've made a decision and there's no turning back, hit me hard. There was no confusion, no doubt. Just one thought: today it all ends. I sat on the edge of my bed for a few seconds, heart racing, hands sweaty. Excitement mixed with fear, and somehow a small, almost imperceptible smile crept across my face. I arrived at the pizza place early. The cold morning air bit at my face, but inside, adrenaline coursed through my veins. I opened the door, flicked on the lights, grabbed my apron and name tag, and walked to the counter. Normally, I would immediately start prepping, measuring flour, weighing yeast, lining up racks, turning on mixers. Today, nothing. I just stood there. Then I walked over to the booth and sat down, calmly sipping chocolate milk I grabbed from the fridge. twirling the straw between my fingers. Every sip seemed to drain a little of the tension that had built up over months of abuse. The kitchen was completely silent. Mixers were off. Racks were empty. The speed-proofer sat cold and untouched. This was the place where I had spent countless Saturdays working nonstop for hours. Wrists aching, muscles burning, covered in flour and yeast. Today, the only thing filling it was silence and me. Time ticked by slowly. I kept spinning my straw, glancing at the clock, letting the anticipation build. In the back of my mind, a tiny voice said, "You can still chicken out." But another louder voice whispered, "No, it's time." Then the staff started arriving. Sleepy-eyed servers pulled off jackets and yawned, talking quietly to each other. Nobody glanced toward the kitchen. They assumed, as always, that the dough would magically be ready. To them, it was always ready. They never realized who was really keeping the place running. Then my boss appeared. That smug, self-assured expression she always wore was plastered on her face, like the world was under her control. She saw me sitting in the booth, sipping chocolate milk, and raised an eyebrow. A soft laugh escaped her. "Wow," she said. "Not starting work yet?" I calmly stood up, walked to the counter, placed my apron and name tag neatly in front of her, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I quit." For a moment there was silence. Then she laughed loudly, like I had just told the dumbest joke ever. "Whatever," she said. "We were going to fire you anyway." She didn't even try to hide her amusement. Then, in her typical oblivious arrogance, she said something that would soon come back to haunt her. "If I were you, I wouldn't have shown up at all. That way you could screw us over by not making the dough." Time seemed to slow. I looked at her, and then I smiled. The kind of smile that carries calm, quiet control. A smile that says, "You have no idea what's coming." "No," I said evenly. "I showed up." Her laughter faltered slightly. "Oh, really?" "I sat here all morning," I said, "and I didn't make a single batch of dough. And since I clocked in, you still have to pay me for my shift." The color drained from her face. Smugness evaporated. She blinked, disbelief etched across her features. Then she glanced toward the kitchen. Mixers off, empty racks, not a single dough ball anywhere. Panic hit her like a tidal wave. "Are you joking? This can't be happening!" she yelled. She ran back and forth, calling to the other staff. "Did anyone make the dough?" Everyone shook their heads. Not a thing. The opening hour was minutes away. And the heart of the restaurant, the dough, was gone. I just stood there quietly watching. No yelling, no dramatic gestures. I just let the chaos unfold, savoring the moment I had dreamed about for months. All that exhaustion, all the ridicule, all the laughter directed at me. It dissolved in an instant. The power dynamics had flipped. I walked calmly to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. Behind me, I could hear the frantic voices, the shouts, the confusion, and the first sparks of real panic. The place literally couldn't open without the dough. For the first time, I felt free and completely victorious. And the best part? This was only the beginning. The morning chaos inside the pizza place was immediate. By the time the first customers started arriving, the reality had hit the staff like a hammer. The restaurant, always buzzing with Saturday breakfast and lunch crowds, was eerily silent. No smell of fresh dough. No steam rising from ovens. No rhythmic clanging of trays and mixers. The servers froze behind the counter, eyes wide, whispering frantic questions to one another. "Where's the dough? How is this possible?" My former boss was running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Her usually composed face now red with panic. Every phone call she made seemed to make things worse. Suppliers couldn't magically deliver dough in minutes, and the limited prep staff couldn't handle the sudden demand. I could hear her voice cracking as she barked orders at servers, who had no idea what to do, while the few remaining kitchen staff scrambled desperately, attempting to improvise. Customers had started lining up, chatting and laughing. completely unaware of the brewing storm in the kitchen. But their amusement turned to confusion when the first orders started falling. Pizzas undercooked, trays missing dough, rushed service that was obviously beyond the staff's capacity. People frowned, murmured, and some even complained loudly, adding fuel to the fire inside. I had never felt more vindicated in my life. Back in the kitchen, the staff looked to my boss for guidance, but she had none. Her smirk, which had been so constant during my months of misery, was gone. Every ounce of control she had clung to had evaporated. Servers whispered under their breath, "This is a disaster," and I couldn't help but chuckle quietly from outside the kitchen. It was surreal. Months of injustice and ridicule, of being the underdog laughed at and dismissed, had culminated in this perfect storm, and I had orchestrated it. By mid-morning, the situation had escalated beyond repair. Lines of customers were growing restless, complaints were piling up, and the aroma of chaos, the mix of burnt pizzas, half-prepped ingredients, and sheer panic hung thick in the air. My former boss was frantically attempting to salvage the day, shouting orders, calling in every employee she could, but it was useless. Without dough, without the foundation of the operation, the entire restaurant was paralyzed. Every glance she gave to the door betrayed her disbelief, as if she couldn't fathom that a 15-year-old kid had managed to completely undo her careful little world. Meanwhile, Scott was gearing up for his own Saturday encore. Well, technically Sunday, his regular dough day. We had talked quietly over the phone the night before, sharing a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. The plan was simple. I had set the stage perfectly, proving the vulnerability in their system. Now it was his turn to hit them from the other side. I could almost see it happening. Another day of chaos, another day of humiliation, and another round of satisfaction for us both. Sunday morning came and Scott executed the plan flawlessly. He showed up on time, apron ready, name tag clipped, looking the part of a dutiful employee. But once he walked into the kitchen, he did exactly what I had done, nothing. Every mixer sat idle, every rack empty, every bit of preparation postponed. He lounged casually in the corner, pretending to check his phone, twirling a straw in his chocolate milk. By the time the first wave of customers arrived, the bakery's Sunday chaos mirrored Saturday's disaster, another disaster perfectly timed. By late morning, the managers were completely undone. Their frustration and humiliation were palpable, a combination of panic, rage, and embarrassment. Their arrogance had led them to believe that they were untouchable, that teenagers like us had no power. Yet here they were, forced to confront their incompetence, scrambling helplessly while the restaurant they thought they controlled descended into chaos. It was one of those moments where justice doesn't just feel good, it feels cinematic. Every mocking laugh they had directed at me over the months, every condescending remark, every single ounce of underestimation and dismissal had returned tenfold. I couldn't help but grin as I remembered our conversations at home, planning how Scott and I would finally reclaim our weekends, our time and our dignity. Later, as the week passed, Scott and I walked into the arena. Our new jobs secured, our weekends finally ours. Every time we retold the story, the laughter started in our chests, building as we described the chaos, the panic, and the face of our former bosses. It wasn't just revenge, it was closure. It was validation for months of frustration. A reminder that even the smallest, underestimated people can flip the script when given the chance. The pizza place eventually reopened for business, but by then the story had traveled through town. Friends, neighbors, even some customers knew about what had happened. The arrogance and dismissal of a few college-aged managers had become a legend in our small town, a cautionary tale about underestimating someone simply because they were young, inexperienced, or just determined enough to strike back. And in that story, Scott and I were the undefeated underdogs. After weeks of settling into our new jobs at the arena, Scott and I would often sit together, reflecting on those 2 chaotic weekends that changed everything. The pizza place, the mockery, the exhaustion, it felt like a lifetime ago. Yet the memory was vivid, almost cinematic, like a movie we had lived through. I'd close my eyes, and I could still hear the whir of the mixers, the slap of dough on the counters, the frantic shouts of our former bosses, and the satisfaction of knowing that we had turned the tables, that we had taken control never faded. It wasn't just about quitting. It wasn't just about taking revenge. It was about reclaiming something much deeper: dignity, agency, and the understanding that even when the odds seem stacked against you, you have power. They had treated us like children, laughed at our struggles, and dismissed our boundaries. For months I had felt that powerless knot in my stomach. The frustration, the simmering anger that comes when someone refuses to see your worth. But in the end, it all became fuel. Fuel that allowed us to orchestrate the perfect lesson. I've thought a lot about why that revenge felt so satisfying. Why the memory still brings a smile to my face years later. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't malice. It was fairness. We didn't destroy the place permanently, and we didn't hurt anyone unnecessarily. We simply highlighted a truth they refused to see. Arrogance and disrespect have consequences. Systems built on the backs of people they underestimated can crumble if those people finally assert themselves. That is the lesson that Saturday and Sunday delivered. Scott and I often laughed about the planning, the execution, the looks on their faces, those moments of sheer panic, the frantic calls to suppliers, the scrambling to open without dough. It became almost surreal in hindsight. We had taken what felt like a hopeless situation and flipped it completely, turning months of frustration into a story we could proudly tell. And that is perhaps the most empowering part of all. Knowing that even as teenagers, we could make a real impact, that our actions mattered, and that we weren't just passive players in someone else's story. Looking back, I realize that there's a lesson for anyone who has ever felt powerless or dismissed. Pay attention. Observe, plan, and when the moment comes, act decisively. Life may not always give you the chance to correct every injustice, but sometimes it hands you the perfect opportunity. And when it does, don't hesitate. Timing, precision, and understanding your leverage can turn even the smallest person into a force no one expects. The story of the 2 chaotic weekends at the pizza place became a shared legend between Scott and me. Whenever we returned for a quick visit to town, we would tell new colleagues or friends. You should have seen the look on their faces, and the laughter would come naturally, unforced, because we knew exactly what it had felt like to finally win. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming agency, and about the quiet satisfaction of proving, in the sweetest possible way, that being underestimated is often the greatest strength you can have. And as I tell this story to you now, I hope it resonates with anyone who's ever been laughed at, dismissed, or treated unfairly. Your circumstances may feel impossible, your opponent's invincible, but sometimes the tiniest spark of strategy and courage can ignite a blaze of justice that no one saw coming. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. Comment below with the most satisfying revenge story you've ever witnessed. And of course, subscribe for more stories like this. Remember, standing up for yourself doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be smart. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply turning the tables while staying completely calm and collected.